Fellas, after UFC 299 and the fact that Curtis Blades called out Tom Aspen and we had the big debut of MVP, I think we're in need of a big UFC UK pay-per-view. Now, they've announced it, well, they haven't announced, but it's been rumoured that there's going to be a fight night card in Manchester, but we don't need fight nights, we need pay-per-view. So I'm creating a stacked UFC pay-per-view from the main card opener all the way to the main event, and I'll also, at the end of the video, come up with 3 extra fights that could either be substitutes for other fights that may not happen on the card, or just extra fights that you can chuck on the prelims. So let me know your thoughts on this card, and if you were to build a card, what you would do. Starting off with the main card opener, I've gone for Arnold Allen versus Josh Emmett. This, I don't care if it's on this card, I just want to see this fight in general. I think it's the perfect time to do it. Josh Emmett coming off a brutal win over Bryce Mitchell, and Arnold Allen on a 2-fight losing streak, but you've got to remember they're against the best in the division, Max Holloway, and then a controversial loss to Movsar Evloev. Yeah, this would be a scrap. Both of these guys are some of the most entertaining fighters in the division. Arnold Allen, he's just got that absolute scrappy style. He just goes in there for a fight, win or loss. He wants to knock your head off. We saw that the knockout he got over Dan Hooker, the win over Calvin Kattar as well. Arnold Allen just comes to scrap no matter who he's against, and I think him versus Josh Emmett, for that reason, would be a fun fight. And then you've got Josh Emmett, who's kind of got the danger factor of his fights. You know, everyone knows that he can put your lights out with one punch, as he did to Bryce Mitchell, and he's done in the past. Also lost to a few of the guys at the top, like Yair Rodriguez and Ilia Topuria. So I think this is the perfect fight for both of them to get back in the title talk. They're both only 1 win away as well, so I feel like matching them up against each other, it's almost guaranteed to either end in a knockout or a scrap. Both of them very similar styles. It would be a really similar fight, and I feel like it's the perfect time to book this fight for the main card opener. And what a way to open up a main card of a pay-per-view as well. Guaranteed that it's not going to be a boring fight. So my first fight on the card, Arnold Allen versus Josh Emmett, needs to happen. Next fight. Now, I've got 2 for this second main card, and you'll see why. The first one is Paddy Pimblett versus Renato Moicano. Now, the reason that I've got 2 for Paddy Pimblett is because I don't think giving Paddy Pimblett Jalin Turner, if Jalin Turner loses to Moicano, is the best idea, because Jalin Turner would destroy him. So the first fight I've got is Pimblett versus Moicano. Now, a few of you are going to be wondering, why is it the second fight above Allen and Emmett? And at the end of the day, it's for pay-per-view reasons. You can't argue Paddy Pimblett is a bigger star than Arnold Allen, even though that's probably going to be a better fight. He's a bigger star. First of all, the build-up for this fight would be hilarious. You've got Paddy Pimblett and Renato Moicano, 2 of the 100% of the press conference, they're going to be going at each other. And I feel like overall, it's a big step up for, obviously, Paddy Pimblett. He's on a winning streak in the UFC, coming off a mauling win over Tony Ferguson. And it's got to the point where Pimblett kind of needs to, he can't really afford to fight bums anymore. Renato Moicano's coming off a good win over Drew Dober. And I feel like if Renato Moicano loses to Jalin Turner, it's the perfect fight for Pimblett. He needs to fight someone ranked 15. I remember when Pimblett debuted in the UFC, everyone was saying there's no chance this guy beats a ranked opponent. So he's finally got a chance to break into the rankings by beating Moicano. For Moicano, he's not going to turn down a Paddy Pimblett fight on a pay-per-view. 100%. He's got eyes on. It's a winnable fight for Moicano as well. Very winnable. Moicano's well-rounded, and I feel like it's definitely winnable for him. It's a classic. It's a classic chance for Paddy to enter the rankings and Renato Moicano to stop Pimblett. Tough test for both of them, and I feel like Paddy Pimblett versus Renato Moicano, it needs to happen. Now, assuming that if Renato Moicano actually beats Jalin Turner, then I think we should do Paddy Pimblett versus Drew Dober. Now, even though Moicano's beaten Drew Dober, so you might look at it as a downgrade, Drew Dober is super dangerous. He's finished so many people in the UFC. He's very dangerous on the feet. He hits hard, and I feel like it's a very tough fight and a scary fight for Paddy Pimblett. The UK might have to watch Paddy Pimblett get absolute flatland in this fight, but first reason, Paddy's white. Second reason, if you've got to remember as well, Paddy Pimblett's a great grappler as well. Drew Dober in the past has shown that sometimes he'll have problems with grappling, so I feel like Drew Dober and Paddy Pimblett, it's another good fight for Paddy Pimblett to enter the rankings. You've got the knockout threat of Drew Dober, and then the submission threat of Paddy Pimblett. It's a big step down for Drew Dober after losing to Renato Moicano, and it's also a big step up for Paddy Pimblett after beating Ferguson. A big second main card fight. I don't care which one happens, as long as we get to see Paddy Pimblett in the UK. Pimblett versus Drew Dober, biggest test for Pimblett's career. Let's have it. Then we've got the featured fight of the night. Now, this is one that everyone wants, no matter what card it's on. MVP versus Stephen Thompson. This needs to happen. Karate versus karate. I mean, this fight was a fantasy matchup a while ago. Even before MVP was even announced against Kevin Holland, this has always been like a fantasy fight. A striker as good as Stephen Thompson versus MVP. Zero grappling would take place in this fight. It would have been an absolute war. In a way, I kind of wish it weren't on this card because, I mean, I'd much rather see this for like a 5-rounder. Obviously, it's not the core main event for this card, so they can't just let him off with a 5-rounder. But Stephen Thompson versus MVP needs to happen. It would be such a good striking matchup to watch. You've got the technical striking of Stephen Thompson and then the showboating, entertaining style that works of MVP. It needs to happen one day. I don't care which card. I hope it happens next. It's also a step up for MVP after getting a win over Holland. And if MVP can get a win over Stephen Thompson, that's going to push him closer to that title picture which he's been chasing, as long as he avoids grapplers. And for Stephen Thompson, he's beating Kevin Holland, so is MVP. It's a fun fight for Stephen Thompson. It's not a dangerous fight like Shavkat, so I feel like it's a good scrap. And I said before, after Stephen lost to Shavkat, we need to save Stephen for the fun fights in this division, and this is exactly that. Winnable for him, but also fun for the fans. Featured fight of the night, the people's main event, Stephen Thompson versus MVP. Next fight, the core main event. Leon Edwards versus Belal Muhammad. I just said Paddy Pimblett. Leon versus Belal, I feel like it has to be the core main event for this card. People will argue that Leon's a bigger star than Aspinall, but I don't care. First of all, Leon's stardom isn't that bit much bigger than Aspinall's. And second of all, it's a good way to get Leon versus Belal as a core main event on a pay-per-view rather than a main event, because I don't think that would sell as a main event. Yeah, Leon's he's big in the UK, or at least for the UK MMA scene. And I feel like Belal Muhammad, you can hate him or love him, but he deserves a title shot. He just does. He's earned a title shot and it needs to happen. I know there's much funner fights out there for Leon, but just get it over and done with. Core main event, let Leon beat him, which he will. And once Leon's beaten him, then we can get onto more entertaining fights in the division, like a Leon Edwards versus a Shavkat, or a Leon versus JDM or Ian Gary. Get Belal out the way, give him his well-earned title shot on a core main event of this pay-per-view. Still a big fight, regardless of if you think it's going to be boring or fun. It's still a big fight. It's a test for Leon Edwards. And listen, it's a big fight. It's a title fight. Let's have it as a core main event for this pay-per-view. Needs to happen. Leon's going to bring the eyes. 2 title fights on one card as well, because it's going to be another title fight on this card. Might not be the most exciting, which is why it's the core main event rather than the main, but still a fight that needs to happen, and I feel like this card is the perfect place for that to happen. In the main event, Tom Aspinall versus Curtis Blades. This main evented as a fight night in 2022. Let's have it as a pay-per-view in 2023. Tom Aspinall, the UFC need to promote this guy. He's going to be the next guy in the heavyweight division outside of Jones. And if John Jones wants to fight Aspinall main event in a pay-per-view in his home country, in his hometown of Manchester as well, against a former foe of Curtis Blades, I feel like that's the perfect way to get Aspinall, turn him into a bigger star, and especially get him into a bigger, more familiar in the UK, and get UK MMA familiar with Aspinall whilst main eventing him, because Curtis Blades, even though it was a fluke win, he's the only person to ruin Tom Aspinall's perfect record. Aspinall's finished every opponent in the UFC. The only fight he hasn't finished is when he got finished in the first round by Curtis Blades because of the knee injury. So it's the perfect chance for Aspinall to get back. And I also think it's very promotable now that Curtis Blades has just gone out there and stopped one of the biggest prospects in the heavyweight division in Gelton Almeida. Aspinall's got a good win over Pavlovich. Blades has got a good win over Almeida. Winner of this, to be honest, I think Aspinall should be the undisputed champion anyway. And I know people are going to disagree with this because they think Aspinall beats or should fight Jones, and I agree, but it's not going to happen. Main event, Tom Aspinall versus Curtis Blades. It would be a fun fight as well. I actually think stylistically, Curtis Blades is the most difficult fight in the heavyweight division for Tom Aspinall because he's well-rounded. Because when you match Tom Aspinall against a guy like Pavlovich or Cyril Gane, the obvious route is to go for the grappling. And if it's a guy like Almeida, just, keep it on the feet. Whereas Blades, as we just saw, he's dangerous everywhere. He's dangerous when grappling. He's a great grappler, and he's striking. He's got power in his hands. So I feel like there isn't a direct route for Tom Aspinall to go and beat him. So I feel like it's an intriguing fight for that matter. Aspinall versus Blades. And now, these are all the fights that I've had, but there might be a few fights that I think could be added to the card. Whether it's a prelim, whether we replace some fights on the main card, I still think there's 3 banger fights that could be added to this card. First one is Mohamed Makayev versus Brandon Royval. Neither of these guys deserve a title shot in the flyweight division. I know the division's a bit of a mess right now, but Makayev's got a kind of a bad win over Alex Perez. It shouldn't give him a title shot. And Royval, even though he got a surprising win over Moreno, he literally lost in December to Pantoja. The number 1 contender fight needs to happen. Give Amir Albazi to Pantoja. And in the meantime, big number 1 contender fight, and it'll be an entertaining fight in the flyweight division. Most fights in the flyweight division are super boring. It's just between 2 people who don't trash talk, have no animosity between each other. And I feel like Royval and Mohamed Mokaev, they have a lot of animosity. The build-up would be fun, and I feel like overall it's either going to be Mohamed Mokaev getting throw checked or Mohamed Mokaev securing himself as a title shot. So either way I take that. Mokaev versus Brandon Royval, boost him in the UK, chucking on the card, #1 contender fight. Next fight, I like to call this one the double retirement fight. Paul Craig versus Chris Weidman. I know Chris Weidman's booked, but Paul Craig versus Chris Weidman, I actually think this would actually be an interesting fight. Double retirement, you get 2 retirements on one card. Paul Craig, even though he's got some notable wins in his career against Ankalaev and Hill, which still everyone's shocked about, he needs to retire. He's getting old, he's definitely not going to win a belt, and he's just been destroyed by Brendan Allen. Give him a winnable fight in Chris Weidman, and Chris Weidman also needs to retire. He got his leg absolutely shattered when he fought Uriah Hall. Then he went against, Brad Tavares, destroyed it even more. There's no threat of Paul Craig beating him on the feet. Do Chris Weidman versus Paul Craig. Craig isn't getting fed a killer like Brendan Allen like he's normally used to. And obviously Chris Weidman has no threat on the feet of losing against a guy as terrible as Paul Craig on the feet. It's an entertaining fight, a bit of a random fight, but I feel like it's the perfect fight that you need on a card like this. Maybe, give it the prelim headliner. Craig versus Weidman. That's a fun fight. And then the final fight, Nathaniel Wood versus Lerone Murphy. Both in the same place around the rankings. They've been scheduled before, and it's some Brit-on-Brit violence. You've got Lerone Murphy, who's a heavy grappler, one of the few British fighters that actually embrace the grappling. And then you've got Nathaniel Wood, a fan favourite who just comes to scrap, win or loss. And I feel like it's a fight that needs to happen. It's been scheduled before. Very rare that we get 2 fighters from England fighting each other, but I feel like it's the perfect time to do this. Both around that top 15 area of the rankings. Lerone Murphy's ranked and Nathaniel Wood's just scraping it, and I think it'd actually be an interesting fight, the way that the styles match up against each other, and they're both big tests to each other. So I'm going to say that Nathaniel Wood and Lerone Murphy, a fight that needs to happen, a fight that's been scheduled, and if Nathaniel Wood wins his next fight, I think this is definitely the fight to book. But yeah, that's me creating a stacked UFC UK pay-per-view card. Let me know your thoughts overall on the card and if you'd agree. And do you like the concept of the extra free fights in the end? Do you think those extra free fights should have been, moved to the main card potentially and replaced for any others? But let me know your thoughts on the main card. Let me know your thoughts on the pay-per-view as a whole. And do you think there should be a pay-per-view? Thank you for watching.